distinguished and esteemed delegates to the Conference of Associate Members, and I dare say, dear friends, damas y caballeros, I would be remiss in my duty if I didn't start by addressing our chair, and I will do so in French. Monsieur le Président, très chers frères, permettez-moi tout d'abord de vous faire part de la profonde reconnaissance qui est la mienne, qui est celle, j'en suis certain, de ce collectif qui sont les membres associés, du secrétariat que j'ai l'honneur de diriger, pour une année de mandat qui a été marquée par un engagement véritable, par une passion inébranlable envers le développement multidimensionnel de nos peuples. Monsieur le Président, mon très cher frère, les États membres de l'Organisation de coopération du Sud et les membres associés de notre organisation collective constituent, à mon sens, les deux ailes d'une même colonne qui permet à notre collectif, à notre famille de nations et de peuples de s'élever vers les idéaux que nous partageons. Et je sais que sans les membres associés dès lors, sans la conférence des membres associés, et sans bien entendu l'engagement qui a été le vôtre durant ce mandat, bien trop court, d'une année, je sais que nous n'aurions pas pu réaliser tout ce que nous avons réalisé lors de l'année qui s'est écoulée. Alors, Monsieur le Président, chers frères, à nouveau, ma reconnaissance est un moment pour vous rendre hommage. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Distinguished delegates to the Conference of Associate Members, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a year since I have last had the honor of addressing you as a collective, as an essential, indispensable subsidiary organ of the General Assembly. The last formal, in-person extraordinary meeting in which I had the pleasure of addressing you was indeed, as our chair has rightfully mentioned, was on the margins of the extraordinary General Assembly that occurred in June last year. And of course, in the year since, our world seems to have transformed once more. Not always, unfortunately, towards the direction, towards the future to which we aspire. Our world has seen greater polarization over the past year, has seen our social contracts coming undone, and perhaps more existentially has seen our environmental equilibria come to the point of being undone, and irreversibly so. And of course, our collective organization, your organization as associate members, has transformed as well. But it has transformed as well not out of blind mimetism or mindless herdism or an excessive porosity to the transformations and the whims of geopolitical variations, but because at its heart, the organization that is our common home has sought over the past year to ask itself and to provide an answer to the question of why is it that conferences seem to follow conferences, declarations seem to rise from the ashes of their predecessors, that for decades we have been speaking of the environmental and climate crisis with overall consensus, except with some trump cards, that action must be taken. And yet, here we are, still organizing conferences, still issuing declarations to reiterate in other lofty words what we have all already agreed upon. And our view, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, our view is that even though we are all clearly aware of the unsustainability, and I would go so far as to say the undesirability of the current status quo, our general understanding that this status quo must be transformed, it seems, at the risk of sounding dramatic, that it is easier for us, the wretched race, to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of the systems that have led the world to the point of unmaking it. And we would argue, and we have sought to embody at the OSC over the past year, that this can be explained principally, not exclusively, by three intimately linked reasons. The first, to paraphrase Régis Debray, because whilst we have known in the past the internationals of hope, the internationals calling unto comrades to build a better future, today, with the climate crisis, we discover a new international, but the international of anxiety, the international of fear. That is the international that seeks to achieve legitimately the avoidance of the worst case scenario. But fear, ladies and gentlemen, fear is necessary in the context of crisis. But taken alone, it is not fruitful. For in the worst case scenario, it is entirely paralyzing. And in the best case scenario, it is entirely and exclusively reactive. as we seek to avoid the tragedy. And of course, what we need as a collective of nations, of peoples, and I would dare say as humanity in its entirety, is to renew with dreams, with ideals, that go beyond avoiding the tragedy, but seek to build the society to which we aspire. Because without dreams, at the risk, once again, as has become my habit, of sounding fluffy, without dreams, there is no real mobilization. And without mobilization, there is no transformation. The second reason, ladies and gentlemen, in our view, is that it is impossible to conceive the end of a status quo without having designed its replacement. There can be no deconstruction without the plans for the reconstruction. And third and finally, so immersed have we become in our development paradigms that are profoundly individualistic, that we have forgotten what collective action means. Collective action, ladies and gentlemen, is not many people doing the same thing at the same time. That is the definition in economics of a crisis. No. A collective and collective action is a purposeful, multi-pronged, and unwavering struggle towards a common purpose. In other words, it is doing different things at different times to achieve a common objective. And without wanting to be condemned or accused of pure sophistry, the reason that I raise this, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, is that over the past year, our collective organization, our family of nations, and our common platform of organizations has transformed because it has sought to embody the answer to those three fundamental preoccupations. Of course, in recognition that our vision at the OSC is an unusual one for an intergovernmental organization. Because ours is not the mandate of keeping the peace. Ours is to contribute to forging the justice of which peace is the sustainable fruit. And therefore our vision in our core mandates, as rightfully mentioned by our outgoing chair, our vision is always a transformative one that requires for our organization to transform itself. In terms of education, the recognition that it is not enough to speak exclusively of including more people in our education systems, but that ours should be the endeavor of building systems that make exclusion impossible. By addressing curricula, by addressing pedagogies, by addressing governance, so that our education systems can not only be more responsive to the universal realities of the 21st century, but that they may also give answer to the aspirations for development of our peoples by contextualizing to national priorities, to local realities. And to do so, not through the secretariats of an intergovernmental organization parachuting itself to the capital cities of member states for workshops of 2 or 3 days and disappearing for 6 months, and then having the audacity to say that we have reinforced national capacities. But by undertaking, in consultation with member states, with associate members, endeavors of genuine capacity building. And during this session, we will have the honor from the Secretariat to present in greater detail some of those flagship programs. But allow me to say here that this explains our endeavor for the establishment of the OSC Institute here at our headquarters, where we have received the first cohort and plan to receive more of experts from member states, of associate members, including some present here, receiving them for 2 months of genuine intensive capacity building, that they may return to their home ministries, their home organizations, and lead the educational transformation to which we aspire. For our organization, and that, as long as I am Secretary General, will be our modus operandi. Our organization must be not the protagonist, the executor of the transformation. That is our associate members. That are our member states. No, our organization must act as a support system, an accelerant, but an environment that enables our members to be the leaders of this transformation. Of course, when we speak of research, we do not speak of any kind of research, ladies and gentlemen, because we fundamentally believe, as the only intergovernmental organization and cross-sectoral organization of the greater South, of our 3 continents, that our duty is also to question fundamental, even though invisible, inequities. And when it comes to research and knowledge, we must question, ladies and gentlemen, 3 fundamental inequities and address them, of course, and overcome them, of course. The first, the inequity of the nature of knowledge. What knowledge is legitimate? What knowledge, on what basis are certain knowledge domains that are fundamental to our peoples and societies being marginalized and excluded from the conversation? Because today, ladies and gentlemen, knowledge generation is no longer the exclusivity, if it ever was, of our higher education institutions and our research centers, who have a crucial role to play, of course, in that knowledge generation. But knowledge is also being produced everywhere. In society, amongst our peoples, in the digital realm. And that too, that popular knowledge, that endogenous knowledge, that too is legitimate. We must also question the economics of knowledge. Who gets access to knowledge? Under what conditions, and who gets funding for knowledge production? And most importantly, who gets to benefit from the fruit of that knowledge that has been generated? And our view from the OSC is that we must bridge the 90-10 divide. 90% of all funding for research goes to research that is adapted to the context or preoccupied with the priorities of 10% of the world's population. We must democratize access to knowledge. And we must ensure that the fruits of knowledge, the fruits of research, especially the ones that are critical to health, to social development, are considered, at least in times of crises, common public goods. And finally, we have to address the geopolitics of knowledge. Who gets to produce knowledge? Whose knowledge gets to be visible? And therefore we must address, as much as I know that at least one of our participants is a firm believer in the contrary, we must collectively question the hegemony of certain languages, and to speak bluntly, the hegemony of the English language, a beautiful language, but no language deserves, no matter its beauty and use, a hegemony. The hegemony of the English language in academia, in knowledge production, which immediately puts at disadvantage researchers not only from the South, who are not native speakers of the English language. Questioning also this lack of multilingualism that prohibits necessary collaboration between our countries who share contexts, where the researcher from Latin America writing in Spanish will never be read by the Arab researcher reading in Arabic. And question also the inequity when it comes to the geopolitics of knowledge. Question the injustice of mobility restrictions on our researchers, that find it exceedingly difficult to travel to collaborate with others, to travel to show and present their research. And therefore, but fundamentally disadvantaged countries of the South. And I dare say that it is nonsensical that it is sometimes easier to get a visa in order to go on a safari than it is to get a visa to collaborate, cooperate, and produce knowledge essential for our development. And of course, in this rationale, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to research also, the OSC over the past year has remained deeply influenced by the experience of the pandemic. An experience that coincided with our birth, having been born in January 2020. And you will all recall, ladies and gentlemen, that at the height of the pandemic, when humanity faced an existential threat, our countries of the South found it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to equitably access vaccines. And not, mind you, as you know better than I, because we wanted charity. Many of our countries were ready to purchase vaccines. But because some whose names shall not be uttered, monopolized production. But when we did receive vaccines, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, we ended up receiving the mRNA versions of the vaccines generated. And whereas I have no objection, even though I am no health expert, no objection to the mRNA technology per se, the truth is that we basically received vaccines that needed to be kept at minus 70 degrees Celsius in countries who, for their majority, had warmer climates, tropical climates, desertic climates, faced intermittent energy supply grids, and pronounced urban-rural divides. So then when we received the vaccines, there was no way for us to keep them, preserve them. That is, we received vaccines that were decontextualized. And this is why, over the past year, in collaboration with the Conference of Associate Members, seeking to address these two areas that must be questioned, we have been honored to launch the Greater South Information System in its beta version, to provide access, democratize access to knowledge within our countries, visibilize knowledge within our countries, and also, crucially, facilitate collaboration across countries, but also across linguistic barriers amongst our researchers, and renew dialogue with academic and non-academic knowledge domains. And on the other hand, this also explains why in the past year we signed an agreement with the government of the Republic of the Gambia to establish a transdisciplinary regional research center in Banjul in order to enhance and reinforce regional ecosystems of research innovation linked to public good preservation. And we plan to continue in that trajectory. And at the risk, of course, sans vouloir, Monsieur le Président, m'éterniser, mais il me semble essentiel de faire part de certaines de ces réflexions. Par rapport à la technologie. Cette révolution technologique, cette révolution numérique que nous connaissons tous, en tant qu'organisation de coopération du Sud, en tant qu'organisation qui se doit de représenter, d'articuler, de confédérer les perspectives de nos pays du Grand Sud, les perspectives de nos trois continents. Nous savons aussi très bien qu'il n'est pas suffisant de parler de la technologie et de l'accès à la technologie. Puisque, soyons très clairs, mesdames et messieurs, en particulier la technologie numérique, mais les autres technologies aussi d'infrastructure, ces technologies que nous recevons, soit par dotation, soit par importation coûteuse, eh bien ces technologies, mesdames et messieurs, et vous le savez à nouveau mieux que moi, ces technologies sont des technologies à code fermé. Nous ne pouvons pas les absorber dans nos systèmes. Nous ne pouvons pas construire sur leur base. Et ces technologies, avec cette révolution numérique, avec cette révolution technologique, en une question de quelques années, 5, 6, 7 années, ces technologies seront obsolètes. Et nous nous retrouverons dans la même situation qui est la nôtre aujourd'hui, qui est celle de passagers et non pas de conducteurs de cette révolution. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we believe it essential from the Organization of Southern Cooperation to work with associate members, to work with member states, not only in bridging the techno-digital divide in terms of access, but to bridge the divide between technology consuming and technology producing countries. That our countries may position themselves as drivers of this fourth, perhaps fifth, industrial revolution. Stimulate our economies by leveraging the creative capacity of our youth. And therefore, over the past year, the Organization of Southern Cooperation has worked with member states and associates, not only in developing platforms such as Crescents, but undertaking a four-layered or four-pronged, and that would be quadri-pronged approach. First, developing open source technologies in-house to be provided to our member states and associate members so that they may build upon them, transform them, and emancipate themselves from vendor dependence. Second, working, of course, with the relevant stakeholders for the development of the relevant policies, the relevant regulatory frameworks that are conducive to endogenous technological development, be it national or regional. Third, facilitating South-South technology transfers, not only because it is more effective from experience, but also because it is more contextual. Even in the case of agriculture, when we negotiate at great length in order to acquire tractors from Holland, as useful as they may be, in Holland, they are ill-adapted to a landscape of a country such as Burundi, that is mountainous, whose agriculture is not on plain fields. But Vietnam has developed technology, for instance, that answers that challenge. So South-South technology transfers. And finally, providing the platform to articulate strategic partnerships between our technological companies and between our governments to achieve our collective digital sovereignty. And chief amongst which shall be presented later, ladies and gentlemen, is the Greater South Fair for Endogenous Technologies that shall be held in October this year, here in Addis Ababa, and at which you are all cordially invited. And finally, regarding the mandates, readiness. And as mentioned by our chair, transforming the international financial architecture. Not only securing resources for development, but transforming the international financial architecture. Because, Mr. Chair, as you rightfully pointed out, we may speak of transforming our education systems, of reinforcing our transdisciplinary research capacities, of becoming drivers of the fourth industrial revolution. And we may even, ladies and gentlemen, develop extraordinary executive plans. But if we do not give ourselves the resources, the means to invest in those critical sectors of our development, to go back to what I was saying earlier, ours will be nothing more than yet another set of lofty declarations, interesting theoretical plans that will be subject to an academic article in 20 years from now. And this requires us, if we need the resources to invest in those sectors, ladies and gentlemen, this requires us to have a double approach, or bi-pronged approach. The first is to address the burden of debt. In 2021 alone, in the midst of the pandemic and in the midst of the debt service suspension initiative, ladies and gentlemen, our countries of the South collectively paid more than $400 billion in debt service, which is more than double the development aid received that same year. And of course, with the pandemic, consensus was reached on the need for a mechanism for debt relief, chief amongst which the common framework for debt treaties. But at 4 years of the creation of the mechanism, we must have the lucidity of undertaking a sober, dispassionate analysis and recognize that the mechanism has not delivered, failing to provide lasting debt relief to any of our countries. And that is because it remains a creditor-centric mechanism, one that is exclusively preoccupied with protecting the interests of creditors, which is legitimate, but fails, which is illegitimate, to take into account the legitimate concerns and needs of our countries. Because when we speak of debt, ladies and gentlemen, and we speak of billions of dollars and trillions of dollars, it is very facile, easy to lose sight of the human dimension of these numbers. What these ultimately mean is that we live in a world where 3.3 billion people, almost half of humanity, are in countries where the governments have no other choice, no other alternative than to spend more on debt service than they can on education or health. But of course, debt relief, ladies and gentlemen, alone is a futile, intellectual, abstract exercise if it is not accompanied with new, more solidary, more concessional finance, less conditional finance for our development. And it is in this context, over the past year, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, that the OSC, working with the member states, in particular with the ministers of finance of our member states, oversaw the historic creation in November 2023 of the Common Leveraging Union of Borrowers, the Club, as the world's first union of sovereign debtors, sovereign borrowers, that we may, on the one hand, engage, should the member states so decide, in collective negotiations to achieve debt relief, but also that we may together secure fresh, highly concessional, solidary finance for our multi-dimensional development. But one, ladies and gentlemen, that also seeks to invest in what we call at the OSC, in what the bylaws of the club identify as strategic sovereignty enhancing sectors. Because ours from the south, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be the constant, perpetual lamentations of the forlorn lover. We cannot spend our time exclusively identifying problems that are outside of our control directly, because we are not countries, we are not peoples that do not have the courage to take responsibility for themselves. On the contrary, we recognize our own responsibility, and we believe that we must address the structural deficiencies of our economies that generate our dependencies. An example that I have given, that others have given as well, is the example of tourism, ladies and gentlemen. Putting aside the social and socio-cultural externalities of tourism, purely from an economic perspective, we are often told, as countries of the South, that ours must be tourism as the engine of our economic development. Often because we are in need of foreign currency. But let us be clear, ladies and gentlemen. Receiving a mass of tourists in countries as an economic policy, in countries that have not achieved food sovereignty, have not achieved energy sovereignty, and have not achieved high value-added industrialization, ultimately means that we suddenly need to import more food that we do not grow, import more fuel that we do not extract, import more cars, air conditioning systems, shuttle buses that we do not produce. And we must do all of that in foreign currency, and foreign currency that we do not have. And therefore we must secure loans in order to import those items to service the tourism that was supposed to bring us foreign currency in the first place. And that is bad debt. Because we have nothing about debt per se. There is good debt. A loan that allows us to build a factory, to build renewable energy plants, that is a good debt. But loans for imports, these are structural drivers of our situation. And therefore in the past year, we have started to engage in the contest of the club with our member states on those 6 strategic areas that seek to overcome those structural deficiencies. Balanced and inclusive education systems. No development without education. Integral health systems, where we must engage in preventative care as much as curative medicine. Sustainable agriculture. Focusing on agriculture that can allow us to feed our people, not only agriculture that is designed for exports. Renewable energies that not only contribute to the sustainability of environmental equilibrium, but also in the medium to long term provide cheaper access to energy. Infrastructure development. And when we say infrastructure development, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, we do so not only at the national level, which is crucial, but as an organization focused on South-South cooperation, we also entirely recognize that South-South cooperation, without the infrastructure connecting our countries, is only an elusive aspiration, because that cooperation becomes too onerous in terms of time, in terms of resources, to be incentivized. I often give the example, ladies and gentlemen, that a few months ago, I had to attend a ministerial meeting in South America. And then I had to attend a meeting in Nairobi. What would have taken me, theoretically, maybe 11 or so hours, maybe 15 hours, ended up taking 25. Why? Because I had to travel from South America to Europe, and from Europe back to the South. So that is, I had to fly in the wrong direction. Or recently, within our regions, because the issue of connectivity is not only a pan-Southern issue, and we believe from the OSC that South-South cooperation and regional continental integration mutually reinforce each other. A strong Africa is a stronger South. A strong Latin America is a stronger South. A more integrated Southeast Asia is a more efficient South-South cooperation. And therefore, even in Africa, flying from Addis, which is one of the best connected cities within the continent in terms of air travel, I recall having to go, because I was going to West Africa, I had to go the easiest route, that is, or most efficient, was to go to Istanbul, to fly back to West Africa. I had to leave the continent to come back to the continent. And therefore we must invest, ladies and gentlemen, an infrastructure that connects our peoples, that enables our cooperation to be effective. And when I say cooperation, not only trade, that enables greater exchanges between our peoples also, that fuel our knowledge-building societies. And finally, of course, in those strategic sectors, endogenous technology development and high-value-added industrialization. And allow me, at the risk of repeating what some of you have heard ad nauseam, but until the situation changes, I see no reason not to reiterate the truth. And the example that I give, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to high-value-added industrialization, because our countries of the South, not only of Africa, remain net exporters of raw or intermediary materials and net importers of high-value-added products. And I give the example, ladies and gentlemen, of coffee. Coffee, which is perhaps my dada, but coffee, the best symbol of our countries of the South. A tree whose fruit is absolutely universal. Everybody drinks coffee everywhere, yet whose roots can only grow in southern soil. Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, the Arab world and Asia Pacific. Yet when you look at the top 10 coffee exporters in the world, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, 4 out of 10 are in a region of the world that does not have a single coffee tree. Europe. And these are, to name those that should not be named, France, Italy, Switzerland, and Germany. And each one of them, ladies and gentlemen, exports more coffee than Ethiopia and Uganda, the two largest African coffee exporters. And that is because we continue, ladies and gentlemen, to export green beans. Whereas they export Nescafe, Nespresso, instant coffee, processed coffee. And we would therefore, as an example of high value added industrialization that can be replicated, I speak of coffee, this could be cacao, this could be cotton, this could be critical minerals that are needed for solar panels and renewable energies. We need to invest when it comes to coffee in coffee processing facilities, in coffee roasting facilities, have our TVET, technical and vocational education and training courses, to provide master blending and roasting capacitation. We need to invest in creating markets within our countries, because there is no need to compete in terms of processed coffee in Switzerland. We can just create markets within our own countries. And often, if you want to create capsules, ladies and gentlemen, well, you need aluminium. And often the coffee producing countries are not aluminium producers, but their neighbors are. And this also creates regional integration. Because we cannot commit the mistake, ladies and gentlemen, of believing that South-South cooperation and regional integration can be limited to agreements between our governments. That is, it cannot be limited to the political will. It is necessary. Without it, we cannot move forward. But in parallel, we need the impetus of our peoples. And what do I mean by that? On the one hand, ladies and gentlemen, we must learn from the North when the North has something to teach. And when you look at the European Union, ladies and gentlemen, the European Union did not build itself, did not arrive to this point by a political decision to create a union. It started, as you know, with steel and coal and evolved until trade amongst those countries made it obvious that it would be necessary to have a common currency. But if you ask me, at the risk of sounding provocative, two projects made the European Union: Airbus which is not particularly political, and Erasmus, that build bridges between our peoples, between their peoples. And this is why, over the past year, ladies and gentlemen, the OSC has undertaken an endeavor to reinforce, enhance, and get us closer to the implementation of the framework to reinforce exchanges between youth and regions through education freely. Our own Erasmus, but more ambitious, as it covers 3 continents, to build bridges between our peoples. And this is why, as a step towards this, as was mentioned by our chair, we have already signed an agreement providing up to 400 postgraduate scholarships to youth of our member states in renowned Brazilian universities on an annual basis. Because this, on the one hand, transforms the lives of those youth who will benefit from the scholarships, but we also hope will enable them to lead the transformation of our greater self, while simultaneously building bridges that are sustainable in time. Governments come and go, political will appears and disappears. But when a young person from Ethiopia travels to Brazil for studies, that is a bridge that will withstand any storm that connects our peoples. But also, we convened on OSC Day out of a determination to ensure that the OSC Day, the day that commemorates our entry into force as an organization, is not limited to diplomatic speeches. We convened in an embryonic format, the first edition, as mentioned by our chair, of the Festival of the Greater Self, to enable exchange amongst artists, writers, poets, performers, dancers from across our countries, showcasing the cultural vitality of our peoples that, yes, has its roots in our past, but is also ever evolving, ever transforming, because we are peoples in motion, and ours are living, breathing cultures. Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I have taken far longer than I had initially planned, and I am grateful for the indulgence of the delegates and of your particular patience, Mr. Chair. I would only seek to conclude by mentioning briefly the future. Because our past, thanks to the support of our member states and associate members, and to you, Monsieur le Président, we have moved in the past year from an organization that was little more than ink upon paper to an institution that has a strong secretariat, proactive governing and subsidiary bodies, and most importantly, an organization that is delivering tangibly on the program of transformation that we share. But the OSC was not created, was not founded. You are not associate members, ladies and gentlemen, in order to look back at the past, tap ourselves on the back, and say, well done. As the Secretariat knows, mine is the repeated, reiterated, and regurgitated sentence that states that the OSC is the club of the perpetually dissatisfied. And in this regard, whilst we find strength in our past achievements, we know all too well our historic duty to look towards the future. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, as some of you may know, I am at the hemistick of my mandate. I am halfway through my verse. I have 3 years behind me, 3 years ahead. And I know that 3 years in the transformation of an international world order is the time for wink. It passes quickly. But I find myself consoled in the knowledge that here, with this Conference of Associate Members, with our General Assembly, we have built a genuine collective that is not dependent on one man. and that the nature of our work is one that not only outlasts any given Secretary General, but that is perhaps transbiological, transgenerational. That we move today planting this seed, knowing that we will probably not benefit from the fruit, but fully aware of the generations that will. But to do so, we must have vision. We must know where do we want to be in 20 years. Because without vision, there is no action, there is only reaction. But ours is the productive, proactive endeavor of building the future that is ours. And as we move towards the General Assembly, the next ordinary session of the General Assembly, due to be held in November, and at which, of course, all the associate members have a right to assist and contribute their views. As we move towards that General Assembly to propose the next biennium program, my intention is not only to preserve what we have done and build upon it, but articulate new proposals so that we may build knowledge-powered societies, that we may accelerate the balanced and inclusive transformation of our education systems, revitalize our cultural and artistic yields, which must take a central part in our organization's programmatic activities, and of course, become drivers of the technological revolution. In so doing, creating as well shared green prosperity between our countries, within our countries, and for the world. We must also intensify South-South cooperation, where I intend, ladies and gentlemen, to present a number of proposals. Intensify South-South cooperation, but also people-led cooperation. And of course, I know that the duty that is mine at this half verse is also to solidify the organization that we collectively deserve, bringing this organization closer to the member states, but also to our associate members. And as we look forward to this session, the second ordinary session of the Conference of Associate Members, I beseech you to be proactive in your recommendations, your views, your proposals, that they may feed the proposals that we will issue in November. Because to paraphrase Paulo Freire, who said in The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, a political or education action program that does not respect the particular view of the world held by the people cannot yield good results. Because such a program constitutes cultural invasion. Good intentions, ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding. And your views, both as individuals, but also as representatives of the collectives that have delegated you to attend. Your views are to be essential to our articulation of the future, of the mechanisms to build the future that we want. And of course, to end more whimsically, Mr. Chair, being at the hemistick of my mandate, but only at the very start of our collective journey, I recall Walt Whitman who said in a very long poem lamenting the situation of the world and his own existence within our societies, by saying towards the end of the poem, "O life, O me, what good amid these questions? O life, O me." Answer that you are here, that life exists and identity, that the powerful play goes on, and that you may contribute to this. And ours, ladies and gentlemen, is the historic duty of writing a collective verse, not rewriting the play, but writing one single collective verse that is sublime enough, potent enough, profound enough, that it changes the course of the play for the years to come. Thank you.